First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about me, Sam Grant the man, because if you know something about me, I don't think you'll be as concerned about what's happening in your area here in West Tennessee. When the war started, I was working for my father as a clerk. I had resigned from the regular Army in 1854 as a captain. Now, some say there's a cloud under those circumstances, but I will tell you there is not. What might be important for you to know is that I waited until I made full captain in the United States Army. At that time, there were only 50 captains in the entire United States Army. I knew that if I made captain, should I ever want to come back in the military, I would come back in at least a captain's rank. And that was important to me, although I did not care for the military life and had no intention of coming back in the Army. In the following years, there are those who would tell you that I was a failure. I would tell you that I was not. I was less than successful in several endeavors, but I wouldn't characterize myself as a failure. When the war started, I was in the community of Galena, Illinois. I was recognized as the captain and helped organize militia units and train them. I went to, on the suggestion of the congressman from my district, Congressman Elihu Washburn, to Governor John Yates. Governor Yates wanted to make me a captain and take a regiment out. I declined that because I felt there was more in store for me than a captain leading a regiment, and I was concerned that I would disappear into the bowels of the war, never to be heard from again, although I felt that it would be a short war. Time passes, and I move into the southeast Missouri, Belmont, Missouri, Columbus, Kentucky area, and the Belmont issue comes up. Belmont was, there are those who would tell you again that it was a debacle. I would tell you different. We accomplished our purpose. We cleared the area of the enemy, and that's why we had gone across the river in steamers and intended to do. However, that combat was not what I would have had it to be. The Confederacy fell back, the troops fell back, and my troops, being less disciplined than I thought they would be, began looting the camp. Combat operations ceased. In fact, I had to order the lieutenant colonel and officers to torch the camp to keep my men from looting anymore, eating the food, and get back into formation. Now, what they didn't know, neither did I, was that first, the Confederate force had fallen back into a wooded area and would have surrendered had we pressed the issue. Since my men were looting and partying, the Confederates saw they weren't being pursued. They reformed, and other troops from across the river at Columbus, at the sound of the gunfire, had started coming to us, or to them. They got together and came back at my force. When my troops heard the gunfire and saw the approaching troops, they started heading back for the steamers at a rapid pace. I got them back to the steamer. I remembered I had dispatched a lieutenant colonel, to the southern edge of our area to be sure that all stragglers were gathered. I jumped horse and rode quickly to that area. When I got there, the colonel wasn't there. When I found him, he said, "I thought I was supposed to leave." I reminded him to follow war. But having gone that far away from the steamer, as you'll remember, my troops were hastily heading for the riverbank, That put the Confederate force between me and my men. I had to skirt a cornfield about 50 yards away from the main Confederate force. At first I was walking the horse because I did not want to attract attention to myself. And this job has been a learn as you go. Later in the war, I would never have gone someplace without an escort, nor would an escort have allowed me to go alone. However, I was alone. When the Confederate troops saw me, a huzzah and a hoop-doo came up, and they were following the Yankee. In fact, Colonel Harris told me after the war, he said, we saw you riding, didn't know who you were, but we saw you riding, and I told my man, there goes the Yankee boys, practice your marksmanship on him. And I was low over my horse and rode back to the steamer. Well, the steamer had left the bank. I was asked just a day or two ago by one of the people in your community, but General, do you think that they just didn't know you were on board? Or they just really wanted to get away that fast? And I said, I think both. I got to the bank, and as you in this area are aware, I'm sure, the Mississippi River banks are very steep. My horse did not want to go down that bank, being a good horseman. I forced him. His legs were fully extended and his haunch, he slid down the riverbank on his haunches. The captain of the steamboat, who had not started the boilers yet, his engines, saw me, lowered the gangplank, and I rode my horse up the gangplank while the boat was still moving. Telegraphed General Halleck that Fort Henry was taken and Hyman, and that I was moving across to Fort Donelson. It was on the 6th. I thought I'd take Fort Donelson by the 8th. That was not to be. Another problem that you are well aware of is the weather changing. It can be warm one day, cold the next. Most of my troops, all of my troops, being northern born, thought that the unseasonably warm weather was your typical Tennessee winter. They thought, we're down south. This is the way it is. Many of them left their blankets and coats at Fort Henry in that area. The ones that kept theirs, most of them threw them down on the side of the road on the march. When we got to Fort Donelson and began the engagement on the 14th, we had savage fighting. But the weather was so bad with the snow and ice that many of my wounded had their hair frozen to the ground because of the snow and the rain, sleet, and their hair would freeze to the ground and had to be cut to get their heads up. Well, after Fort Donelson, we had to deal with about 13,000 prisoners to be sent north, Camp Douglas in Chicago. I had heavy numbers of wounded and dead. They had to be attended to, obviously, and the men were exhausted. It had been a savage 2-day battle. I moved, or intended to move, here to Clarksville. Now, Clarksville is important for a couple of reasons. Perhaps you should be proud of your town and your role in the war. We had to have Clarksville because if I didn't have Clarksville under federal control, it could be, Confederate forces could be a bone in my craw getting to Nashville. Moreover, there are boundaries, iron boundaries here, that were producing ordnance for the Confederacy. And I could not have that. So I sent General Smith to Clarksville. General Smith told me afterward, he steamed up, he was ready for a fight, Fort Defiance. And he said when I got there, the flag surrender flag was already out. serious combat here. Clarksville has, I dare say, prospered from the occupation because you weren't put to the torch. And Flag Officer Foote issued a proclamation to leave the citizenry alone and the property alone. I would have done the same. So Clarksville avoided the torch, avoided destruction, and was left intact, and I dare say will prosper under federal occupation. And it was also here that some of the first colored troops were enlisted. And we began forming USCT regiments. So that is another milestone for Clarksville. And we did address the issue of the families. So we moved on to Nashville. Now things happened quickly, especially in the military sense. By the time we got to Nashville, General Buell was bringing his Army of the Ohio from Louisville down to Nashville at a glacial pace. I went to Nashville to implore General Buell to move on Nashville, and we would join forces from the Donaldson, Clarksville area with Nashville, because at that time, Sidney Johnston had fallen back to southern Tennessee, north Mississippi. We had the forces at that time, had we combined our armies, to have gone to Chattanooga, Atlanta, Vicksburg, Corinth, anywhere that we wanted to go. But General Buell declined. In fact, General Buell told me that I'm not under your jurisdiction, Grant, and I outranked his commission, prepaid mine. So he stayed on the other side of the river in Edgefield. He very carefully stayed on the other side of the river because if he had come across, he would have been in my district. But we didn't, and I dare say that prolonged the war for 6 months. And as it turned out, Sidney Johnston was not outside of Nashville. He'd fallen back, way back south of Nashville. Buell told me there's gunfire and combat out there, and I told him, no, it's not combat. The Confederates are evacuating Nashville and taking everything they can with them because it is a rich supply depot. And what you're hearing is a rear guard action as Sidney Johnston falls back. Nathan Bedford Forrest is there. And you're hearing the destruction of supplies and a rear guard action. But nevertheless, General Buell saw fit not to. After Donaldson, as far as you citizens are concerned, you're under occupation, which I hope is not too unpleasant. And again, you're not having your homes destroyed. Your town is not being shelled and destroyed. And you are prospering from federal occupation doing business with federal troops. Now, there are those of you here who are glad that we're here. But you don't tell your neighbors that. Crossroads in Corinth, Mississippi was the most important crossroads in the war. The Army controlling the crossroads would control the Western theater because of its proximity to Vicksburg, Memphis, Jackson, Nashville. And I meant to have it. I moved my army to Pittsburgh Landing, a little place called Pittsburgh Landing, nondescript, riverbank town. There are those who would tell you that I was surprised at Shiloh. I would tell you I wasn't. But I'll go back to my earlier comment. This is a learn as you go job. More men were killed at Shiloh in 2 days, actually a day and a half, than were killed in the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Mexican War combined in 48 hours. The country was brought to its knees. I don't know how long this war is going to last. Until Shiloh, after Fort Donelson, I wrote Julia a letter and said, dated February the 19th, I think there shall be one more great struggle and the war will be over. I was wrong. After Shiloh, on April the 8th, I wrote Julia a letter and said, I used to be among those who thought that this would be a brief war. I am no longer of that opinion. I think this is going to be a long and bloody war, and it will be fought until one side can no longer stand and fight.